Hello, communications class, and I'd like to welcome you into my home. It looks like I just got done crying, and that's not true. It's just been a bad day for allergies. But The Wedding Planner is the movie that I watched, and boy, it was a tearjerker. I was just weeping profusely after seeing this movie. I'm just kidding. I mean, it was a good movie, a classic movie from the 20s, and my presentation, I'm going to break down some of the major intercommunication or communication principles that the movie really emphasizes and shows. So there's a couple points that I'm going to go through the book here for, and watch the TV for like a minute for the scene or for the clip, and so let's get started. All right, so the first point I wanted to make from the book is that interpersonal communication is purposeful, and the book lists seven or eight like purposes of communication. But the three ones that I wanted to talk about pertaining to the movie are staying in touch with friends, which in this movie, I mean, J Lo is a career-driven, very professional wedding planner. She's very successful. She's very at the top of her game. But as a result of that, she has friends, she has her coworkers, but she really doesn't have too many, friends or too many relationships. She has her dad, and she volunteers at the senior citizen home and whatnot. There's a little bit of limited communication, or limited purpose there as far as the movie shows, but the other two purposes of communication are making new friends and finding romantic partners. And that's really what the majority of the movie is about. It's about obviously J Lo's relationship with Matthew McConaughey, and how she thinks he's available, but then she finds out that she is actually planning his wedding, and that creates some conflict and drama. But interpersonal communication is purposeful, and for the purposes of the movie, I mean, the main point of most of the communication is regarding J-Lo's ability to find a romantic partner. And here were some good, other purposes of interpersonal communication. Five of them are to learn, to read, to relate, to influence, to help, and to play. And as far as learning, I marked down here that J-Lo learned what Matt's values were. J-Lo is learning more about Matthew McConaughey as the movie progresses, and here's a quick scene that accurately shows that. There we go.
Roses, wreaths, donated more statues. Not this beauty.
Interesting. This is called a bleeding heart. The official funeral flower.
Thank you for listening, real Susan. We'll be right back.
How'd you guys meet?
College.
She was in one of your classes?
No, she's a bookie.
I was a bookie?
Yeah, she's a bookie. Single-handedly established this underground gambling ring at UC Berkeley. Took bets on every sporting event you could imagine. Ran numbers and even hosted a Vegas night for sorority.
You're lying.
No, that's right. Bookies.
All right, so we can see from that J-Lo was learning more about Matthew McConaughey's relationship, obviously, with his, soon-to-be, well, not, spoiler alert, not wife. She was learning about, what made the relationship work initially. Matthew McConaughey's flower selection was interesting, that for his wedding, which is supposed to be one of the happiest days of your life, you pick bleeding Susans, which represent a death, or for a funeral in Tibet. So, but communication happens all throughout this movie, where J-Lo and Matthew McConaughey are learning more about each other. Another purpose of communication is to influence, where we influence people to think like us, or subscribe to a certain viewpoint and whatnot. And I just think of the example in the movie where Matthew McConaughey is throwing out all the M&Ms except brown ones because that might have less food coloring or artificial food coloring. So he's a health nut. That's his thing. And then at the end of the movie, J-Lo is doing the same thing. So his communication was influencing her in a way that she might not have realized at the time. A communication purpose is to help, and that's what Matthew McConaughey does immediately after he meets J-Lo. He helps her, get out of that bad situation with the dumpster headed towards her, where she, could have been potentially injured. And the, in the doctor's office, in his doctor's office, he is going over test results, and he is going over, how to proceed with some of those injuries, or, with how lucky she was to not really get that injured at all. So, communication is meant to help. And finally, communication is meant to play, as far as, the dates, the dancing, the, back and forth, the romantic back and forth that they go throughout the movie. So, from the horse riding scene to, again, the dancing scene, where there's definitely some romantic tension. So communication, obviously takes place on a number of planes, but in the movie, what's really emphasized is the romantic, aspect of it. Point number 2, interpersonal communication is a package of signals. And one of the main, miscommunications in the movie was that after Matthew McConaughey saved J-Lo, he went on basically a date with her, even though he was engaged and weeks away, months away from his wedding at the time. And I've only been married for a couple years, and my wife and I have been together for 6, but I wasn't looking to date anybody, or I wasn't going out on these moonlight sonatas a few months before the wedding. So that's odd behavior for Matthew McConaughey, and it just talks about how communication is a package of signals. Now, we put together a number of things in our heads based on how people present themselves, what their attitudes are, what their beliefs are, how well they communicate, and then we formulate our own opinion of them. And in that case, J-Lo came to the mindset that he was single and that he was ready to mingle, basically. And but that was not the case. That was not the case at all. And that happened, and she found that out whenever she had signed up to be the wedding planner for one of the biggest weddings of the century. It wasn't the royal wedding, apparently. But she found out that Matthew McConaughey was the guy that she has to do the wedding for. And so she felt betrayed and let down, because that package of signals that Matthew McConaughey was sending to her was that he was available, and he really wasn't happy in whatever relationship he was in, which turned out to be true. So point number 4, interpersonal communication is a process of adjustment. I just found that to be interesting and accurate. Because before I was a pastor, I was in the I was a journalism major, and each we'll say career has a certain language or lingo to it that if you don't understand the language, you're only going to get so far. If somebody tells you grab an XLR cable, out of the briefcase, put it into audio jack 2, and then mix it properly through the sound system. If you don't know what those things are, you're not going to understand what they want. And just like if you're in the medical field, that's why we take med term or anatomy and physiology, so you can have a basic understanding of a basic understanding of the language of what people are trying to say. And although this movie doesn't really get into that, wedding planners weddings do have a certain lingo to them. There's the TFOS, or TFOB, the father of the bride, and there's a couple other There's a couple other, wedding terms that wedding planners have to familiarize themselves with. And if they would really struggle in their career if they didn't know what some of those basics, pertaining to weddings are. If they didn't know the order of the ceremony of the weddings, if they didn't know what the typical protocol of weddings are. So, again, even though the movie really doesn't get into that much, 1 second. Ugh. Like people, my Xbox friends think I have like a cocaine habit because I'm just snorting like all the time with allergies. Ridiculous. So that is point number 4. And point number 5 is I want to talk about some of the power that people have in communication when we communicate with one another. There's a couple different things. There's legitimate power. There's referent power. There's reward power. There's expert power, and there's information or persuasion power. And for legitimate power, as the wedding planner, this J-Lo was at the top of her game. She was one of the most sought after wedding planners, in the movie. And so she had some power as to whether or not she took the job, whether her recommendations were going to be taken seriously. So that is, whenever you're really good at what you do, you have power over, other people. That's negotiating, that's leverage. If you go to a car lot and you are talking to a rookie car salesman versus a veteran car salesman that, has done that time and time again, odds are you're more likely going to get, I don't say suckered into, but, buying the car that you might not have wanted in the first place if you talk with a veteran salesman as opposed to the rookie. And so, J-Lo has legitimate power as far as her, as far as her status as a wedding planner is concerned. But Matthew McConaughey and the bride, which, names in this movie really don't matter. The bride, and it's not going to work out. Everybody knows that. It's rom-com. But, her and Matthew McConaughey do have reward power in the sense that, they are the clients. In business, client is always right. There's that saying. So, J-Lo wants them to be happy, and that's because, J-Lo is, going to expect a big paycheck. She's going to expect a big status boost from that. So, she needs to make sure that things are, in order and are as, Matthew McConaughey and, the bride would want them to be. So, that it's just some of the power in communication, and again, there's other forms of power. There's expert power, which is where people look at you as, oh, well, he's an expert, he's a doctor, he's a lawyer, like he knows this stuff, so we should listen to him, and there's various other types of, power which, dictates that. So, and finally, point number 6 I wanted to emphasize was, and we talked about this at the beginning of class, this is one of the, I guess, like the main takeaways from our first couple of weeks of class, is that communication, there's 3 things. Communication is inevitable. Communication is irreversible. This laptop is horrible. It's like 10 years old. Sorry, the camera's here. Communication is inevitable. Communication is irreversible. And communication is unrepeatable. And, we see these instances in the movie where, J-Lo and Matthew McConaughey inevitably have to communicate. He, at the beginning of the movie, tackles her to save her from the dumpster that is getting ready to hit her, and, then they begin to communicate. Like, it would just be weird if he just tackled her and then just creepily, just chilled on top of her. Like, that's not cool. Like, that's definitely not cool. So, communication is irreversible in the sense that, what you say cannot be taken back. And with some of those miscommunications that J-Lo and Matthew McConaughey endure throughout the movie, is that they can't take back what they've said. Matthew McConaughey says a few, ill-timed or insults to J-Lo at the middle of the movie, calling her she was just an opportunity. and can't take that back. It's kind of like the toothpaste. Once it's out of the tube, it's very hard to get back in the tube. And finally, communication is unrepeatable. And although the movie really didn't talk about that, I mean that's just a true statement. We cannot say things in the same exact tone of voice, in the same way, in the same context. Once it's out there, it's out there. So, that being said, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I mean, visual sadness aside, I mean, I like my house here, but I haven't shaved in since all this started, and I need a haircut. Like, this is ridiculous. Maybe when barbers open up and all this is at least at a manageable level, that'll happen. But I hope everybody's staying safe and doesn't get the virus or anything. And best of luck to everybody, and best of luck to you, Mrs. Beef. Thanks for a good class, and I will talk to you soon. So see you around in class. Okay, thank you. God bless.